Before the flood, before corruption tainted creation, earth shimmered with untouched glory. Imagine a world sculpted by divine hands, rivers gleaming like crystal, skies painted with eternal light, forests humming with life unscarred by death. Humanity, though cast from Eden, still walked in the warmth of divine memory. The ground yielded without struggle. Lions rested beside lambs. Mountains whispered secrets, and oceans sparkled with purity. No war, no hunger, no fear, only harmony. This was the forgotten age of innocence, when man still remembered God's voice, and the earth responded to his touch. Nature sang in perfect rhythm, and the stars stood as silent witnesses of a sacred covenant. But hidden beneath the beauty, a shadow stirred. Innocence hung by a thread, fragile and unaware. This breathtaking calm wasn't eternal. It was the pause before the storm. A paradise soon to be lost, erased by choices that would awaken judgment and shatter creation's peace. Before we continue, please do me this favor. Please, like, subscribe, share, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next revealing chapter of these timeless stories. Let's begin. From one womb came two sons, Cain, the tiller of soil, and Abel, the tender of sheep. Born into a world still echoing Eden's memory, they carried both hope and fragility. Abel's heart beat with devotion. His offerings pleased God. Cain's, though hardworking, lacked surrender. When divine favor rested on Abel, Cain's spirit twisted. Jealousy, a seed never before known, grew into silent rage. Love turned to bitterness, and in a lonely field, the unthinkable happened. Brother struck brother. Blood cried from the ground, staining the earth with sorrow. This was no ordinary death. It was the first. The innocence of humanity shattered in a single act. God's voice thundered with grief, not only for Abel's loss, but for Cain's fall. Judgment followed, but so did mercy. Two paths emerged, one of righteousness, one of rebellion. From that moment, two bloodlines began, one chasing God, the other fleeing him. And history would never be the same. After Abel's death and Cain's exile, Eve bore another son, Seth, a child of promise. Through him, a new line rose, one that honored the name of the Lord. These descendants walked in reverence, seeking righteousness, preserving the memory of Eden and the ways of God. But Cain's legacy spread like wildfire. His descendants built cities, forged weapons, and chased earthly glory. They worshiped strength, power, and pleasure, silencing conscience, exalting rebellion. Two worlds now existed side by side, one humble and holy, the other proud and profane. The righteous line of Seth became the keepers of truth, while the wicked line of Cain gave rise to corruption, violence, and defiance. Light and darkness grew together, yet apart. And as generations passed, the lines blurred. Intermarriage, influence, and temptation began to erode the righteous. A slow, silent decay crept in, setting the stage for the greatest judgment the world would ever face. The lineages of Seth and Cain became the twin currents shaping the soul of the pre-flood world. Seth's descendants nurtured faith, humility, and devotion. They preserved sacred knowledge, passed down God's commands, and kept alive the hope of redemption. They were shepherds, prophets, and men who walked closely with God, like Enoch, who was taken before death. In contrast, Cain's lineage pursued dominion, pleasure, and self-glory. They built cities, created music, forged iron, and mastered craft, but without conscience. Lamech, Cain's descendant, boasted of murder and polygamy, revealing how far darkness had spread. As time passed, these two lines mingled, spiritually and physically. The righteous began to compromise. Holiness dimmed. Violence became common, and mankind's heart turned cold. The world was advancing, yet decaying. The balance tipped. And as wickedness multiplied, God grieved. The corruption of these intertwined legacies prepared the world for judgment, and only one man, Noah, would be found blameless in the chaos. Banished from Eden's presence, Cain wandered, a marked man, carrying guilt heavier than the earth he once tilled. Yet even in exile, he refused surrender. Instead of repentance, he built walls. There, in defiance, rose the first city, Enoch, named after his son, a monument not to God, but to self. No longer wandering, humanity began settling, building, expanding. Brick by brick, they traded dependence on God for security in structures. In Enoch's streets echoed pride, not prayer. The city pulsed with innovation, beauty, and ambition, but no holiness. Within its gates, men learned to forge metal, tame beasts, and manipulate sound. But behind the brilliance lurked rebellion. They sought mastery over nature, over others, even over the divine. Cities multiplied, culture flourished, but righteousness withered. These were not just dwellings, they were declarations. Cain's city was the first spark of a world chasing power without purpose, drifting farther from the voice that once walked in Eden. As cities rose from dust, so did the minds of men awaken to creation's hidden secrets. They learned to shape stone, mold metal, and bend fire to their will. Tools were crafted, first for survival, then for control. What began as simple invention soon evolved into mastery. From the line of Cain came Tubal-Cain, the first metalworker, forging bronze and iron blades, hammers, and weapons unknown before. His forge glowed not only with industry, but with the embers of violence. Music too was born. Jubal, his brother, strung chords and carved flutes, giving birth to art. The sound of harps filled the air, not always with worship, but often with pride. Creativity was awakened, but without the Creator's guidance, it drifted. Art became vanity. Tools became weapons. Progress became corruption. Humanity tasted power and wanted more. They touched the edge of divine knowledge, but lacked divine wisdom, opening doors to darkness disguised as brilliance. Whispers from the heavens descended, not as divine guidance, but as forbidden secrets cloaked in beauty. The fallen beings, once watchers of mankind, crossed the line between spirit and flesh, offering knowledge man was never meant to hold. They taught the crafting of weapons, enchantments, astrology, root cutting, and charms. Men learned to read stars, manipulate nature, summon forces, and alter creation. Women learned seduction through painted faces and adorned bodies. Wisdom, once reserved for angels, now filled mortal minds, but not without consequence. This knowledge dazzled, empowered, and corrupted. What seemed like a gift brought ruin. The earth became polluted, not just in blood, but in spirit. Greed replaced gratitude. Lust overpowered love. Pride silenced reverence. The fallen had given man power, but stolen his innocence. And as humanity embraced this curse disguised as light, the balance tilted. Heaven watched in sorrow, knowing judgment now stirred beneath the surface of a poisoned world. The Watchers were once angels, divine beings tasked with guarding and guiding humanity. But in time, their hearts grew restless. They gazed upon earth, captivated by its beauty, and their gaze turned from guardianship to desire. Bound by heavenly law, they were forbidden to interfere in human affairs. Yet, driven by longing, they broke their sacred vows. Led by a fallen leader, Azazel, these angels descended to earth. They took human wives, blending the divine with the mortal. In their rebellion, they defied God's design and sought to corrupt creation. Their descent wasn't just an act of disobedience. It was a rejection of their divine purpose. They sought power, influence, and union with the very beings they were meant to protect. But in doing so, they unleashed chaos, introducing forbidden knowledge and a legacy of destruction. The Watchers, once servants of heaven, became the architects of mankind's greatest downfall. In the shadows of a world still untouched by corruption, something unthinkable transpired. The fallen angels, once celestial beings, descended to earth, their hearts twisted by forbidden desire. They took human wives, creating a union that defied nature's laws. These were no mere marriages. These were acts of rebellion against the divine order. The angels, endowed with supernatural strength and knowledge, mingled with the daughters of men, bearing children of unimaginable power. These offspring, known as the Nephilim, were giants, both revered and feared. They embodied the darkest union between heaven and earth, a hybrid of celestial arrogance and human fragility. The land trembled under their weight, and the earth groaned with their wickedness. What began as a forbidden love affair became a curse, leaving behind beings of immense strength but insatiable evil. The world was forever altered, and mankind's innocence, once held sacred, was tainted beyond repair. From the forbidden union of fallen angels and human women came the Nephilim, beings of legend, giants who stood as a terrifying reminder of mankind's fall. They were not of this world, towering over mere mortals with strength and power beyond comprehension. Their presence sent ripples of fear across the earth. With the blood of both angels and humans coursing through their veins, they were a symbol of rebellion, walking among men as living monuments to defiance. The Nephilim were warriors, hunters, and kings, but also beings of great corruption. Their actions grew darker with time, spreading chaos, violence, and destruction. They dominated the lands, their size and strength wreaking havoc on all who stood before them. These monstrous offspring were not just giants in stature, but giants in sin, embodying the very evil that had ruptured the harmony between heaven and earth. Their existence was a prophecy of the impending judgment that loomed ever closer. The Nephilim were both heroes and horrors, towering figures born of rebellion. Their strength was unmatched, wielding power that struck awe and terror into the hearts of men. Some were seen as gods, worshipped by the people they ruled, their immense size and might regarded as gifts from the heavens. But beneath the surface of reverence, there was fear. For these giants were not gentle gods, but monstrous tyrants. Their appetite for violence was insatiable, their cruelty legendary. They trampled over villages, enslaved tribes, and brought destruction wherever they went. Heroes to some, demons to others, they were the living embodiment of mankind's darkest desires and the consequences of forsaking God. As they roamed the earth, the world descended into chaos. The beauty of creation was overshadowed by their monstrous presence. The Nephilim were a paradox, beings of incredible strength, yet carriers of an evil so profound it would bring about the world's reckoning. The Nephilim were not just giants in size, but in terror. Their mere presence struck fear into the hearts of humanity. These monstrous beings were not protectors, but oppressors, crushing everything in their path. They ruled with brute force, sowing violence, destruction, and despair wherever they stepped. Villages were razed to the ground, families torn apart, and entire tribes enslaved. The world trembled under their shadow, and cries for mercy echoed unanswered. The Nephilim were merciless conquerors, driven by their insatiable hunger for power and control. The earth itself seemed to recoil as these titans waged war, their immense strength rendering human resistance futile. People prayed to the gods for deliverance, but salvation seemed distant. This reign of terror marked the world's descent into chaos, a period where the lines between fear and despair blurred. The Nephilim weren't just giants. They were the harbingers of mankind's undoing, their terror seeding the darkness that would soon engulf all. The Nephilim didn't just wreak havoc on humanity, they corrupted all of creation. Their very existence twisted the natural order. As giants born of a union between angels and humans, they sought dominion over every living thing. In their thirst for power, they began to distort the animals, mutating creatures of the wild into monstrous forms. Beasts grew fiercer, more violent, no longer content with their natural instincts, but driven by an unnatural rage. Even the birds, once symbols of freedom, became ominous creatures, their calls echoing with a dark foreboding. But it wasn't just nature that they tainted. The Nephilim's bloodline spread, infecting human descendants, intertwining with the pure bloodlines of Seth's righteous line. This crossbreeding of divine and human corrupted the very fabric of humanity, leaving a stain that no one could erase. Creation itself groaned under the weight of their corruption, and the world fell deeper into chaos. In a world suffocating under the weight of corruption and violence, Noah stood as a lone beacon of righteousness. While the earth groaned with the cries of the oppressed and the shadows of sin spread like wildfire, Noah remained unyielding in his faith. Amidst the chaos, he was the only man who walked with God, his heart pure in a time when hearts had turned cold. He did not succumb to the temptations of the Nephilim or the wickedness that had poisoned every corner of the world. Instead, he labored in obedience, building the ark as a symbol of divine hope and judgment. His life was a testimony to unwavering integrity in a decaying world. While others mocked him, Noah's faith never faltered. His righteousness was a stark contrast to the wickedness around him, a solitary light in a world spiraling toward destruction. Through Noah, God's grace would endure. Noah's mission was one of immense sorrow and isolation. He stood in the midst of a society consumed by wickedness, preaching righteousness in a world that had long forgotten the meaning of purity. Day after day, he called out to a lost generation, urging them to turn from their evil ways, warning of the flood to come. But his cries fell on deaf ears. The people mocked him, ridiculed his faith, and laughed at his words. They saw him as a fool, building an enormous ark in a world where rain was unknown. Yet Noah pressed on, unwavering in his obedience to God, even as the sting of rejection pierced his heart. The weight of preaching truth in the face of such opposition was heavy, but his faith held firm. His pain was not just in the mockery, but in the heartbreak of seeing a world choose destruction over salvation. When Noah received his secret instructions from God, the weight of the responsibility was overwhelming. In a world drenched in corruption and violence, God called upon him to build an ark, an enormous vessel that would carry the last remnants of life through the coming flood. But this wasn't just a task. It was a divine mandate that would test Noah's every fiber. With no blueprint or precedent, he was told to build the ark with precise measurements, materials, and design, an undertaking so vast it seemed impossible. As the world around him laughed and ridiculed his faith, Noah worked tirelessly, each stroke of his hammer driven by a profound sense of obedience and fear. The burden of responsibility weighed heavy on his heart. He was not just saving his family, but preserving the future of creation itself. Alone in his mission, Noah felt the crushing solitude of carrying God's impossible plan. As the days grew darker, the earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of impending judgment. Strange signs began to appear in the heavens and on the earth, omens that no one could ignore. The skies, once clear and steady, became filled with unnatural phenomena. Eclipses, blood-red moons, and shooting stars streaked across the heavens, stirring fear in the hearts of those who still remembered the ancient prophecies. On the earth, the very land seemed restless. Rivers swelled with no explanation, and animals began behaving erratically. The winds howled with an unfamiliar fury, carrying whispers of doom. People looked to the stars, but the skies no longer seemed to offer answers, only warnings. These signs were not coincidences, but divine messages, a final chance for repentance. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence of judgment approaching, the people continued in their wickedness, blind to the truth that loomed ever closer. As the signs grew more ominous, the voices of the prophets echoed louder, warning of the impending flood. Enoch, a man known for his closeness to God, spoke with urgency of a coming judgment. His prophecies, filled with fire and wrath, painted a picture of a world undone by its own wickedness. Enoch's warnings were clear. The flood would cleanse the earth, wiping away the corruption that had spread so deeply. Yet his words were ignored, dismissed as the ramblings of an old man. Alongside him, Methuselah, the longest living man on earth, also foretold the coming deluge. His very name meant, "When he dies, it shall come," a chilling reminder of the fate awaiting the earth. Methuselah's warnings, though filled with sorrow, were a final chance for repentance. But instead of turning to God, the world continued its descent into chaos, deaf to the cries of those sent to save them. As the world cracked under the weight of its sin, the people remained stubborn in their disbelief. Even as the heavens trembled with strange signs and the earth groaned with unnatural forces, the people scoffed at the warnings. They were blinded by their pride, consumed by their own desires, and unwilling to accept that their time had run out. Noah's message of repentance was met with mockery and disdain. The ark, still under construction, became a symbol of their defiance. How could they believe in a flood when they had never seen rain? How could they accept a judgment they had never witnessed? The reality was too unfathomable for them to grasp. Even as the cracks in the earth deepened, the animals grew restless and the skies darkened. They continued on in their ways, blind to the looming catastrophe. Their refusal to believe sealed their fate, leaving them unprepared for the devastation that was about to come. In the final days, as the earth held its breath, the animals began to arrive, led by an unseen hand, as if the very earth itself was obeying God's command. From every corner of the earth, creatures of all kinds, large and small, began to march toward the ark. 2 by 2, they came not by instinct, but by divine direction. Lions, elephants, and birds, once scattered across the vast land, moved in perfect harmony, filling the air with their presence. There was no confusion, no chaos, just a miraculous procession, as though creation itself knew the hour had come. The sight was breathtaking, yet terrifying, a living testimony to the impending judgment. Noah, witnessing this divine orchestration, felt the weight of God's command heavier than ever. The final countdown had begun. As the animals entered the ark, the world watched in silence, knowing the time of reckoning was nearly upon them. As the last of the creatures entered the ark, the world held its breath. In that moment, the unimaginable occurred. The door of the ark shut, not by the hands of men, but by God Himself. A deafening silence followed as the heavy, wooden door sealed the fate of the world. The sound of it closing echoed like a final, irrevocable verdict. The people who had once mocked Noah's faith now stood outside, desperately pounding on the door, pleading for mercy. But it was too late. The door was sealed, and the judgment had been set in motion. God's hand had moved. There was no more time for repentance. The earth trembled in anticipation as the ark, a refuge of salvation, stood as the last hope for life. Outside, the rain began to fall. The door, a symbol of divine grace and judgment, had closed, marking the end of one world and the beginning of another. As the door of the ark slammed shut, panic erupted across the earth. The once laughing crowds, who had mocked Noah's warnings, now found themselves gripped with terror. Desperate cries filled the air as men, women, and children ran toward the ark, begging for salvation. Their voices echoed in the wind, pleading for Noah to open the door, for they now saw the truth they had refused to acknowledge. Chaos consumed them. The ground trembled, and dark clouds began to gather, as if the heavens themselves were about to unleash their fury. The realization hit with brutal force. The flood was not a myth, it was real, and there was no escape. Some fell to their knees, others tried in vain to force the door open, but it was sealed forever. Their last-minute panic could not undo the years of rebellion. The flood was coming, and they were left outside, unprepared. As the floodgates opened, the earth began to weep. Torrential rain poured from the heavens, an unrelenting downpour that filled the sky with darkness. Heaven wept, unleashing its wrath upon a world that had long turned its back on righteousness. The waters, once held back by divine command, now flooded freely, as if the very heavens could no longer contain their grief. Below, the earth itself broke apart. The ground cracked, and fountains of water erupted from deep within, as though the planet itself was mourning. Mountains collapsed, rivers swelled, and the once fertile land became a chaotic sea of destruction. The rain and the rising waters came together, overwhelming the land, swallowing everything in their path. The unimaginable power of this wrath tore apart the world that had once been so beautiful, leaving nothing but an ocean of despair. The wrath from above and below consumed all. The earth trembled under the weight of divine fury as fire and water rained down in an unholy union. Fountains of water erupted from deep within the earth, while the heavens opened wide, releasing torrents of rain that flooded the world with relentless force. The ground shook, splitting open in jagged cracks, swallowing cities and entire civilizations in its path. Mountains that once stood as immovable giants crumbled, their peaks disappearing beneath the raging floodwaters. Fires sparked in the chaos, lighting the dark sky with hellish flames, igniting forests and villages that were quickly drowned in the rising tide. The very air seemed to burn with destruction. Humanity, helpless against such power, was consumed by the fury of creation itself. No cries, no prayers could stop the cataclysm. It was the end of an era, an overwhelming force that wiped away all traces of life, leaving only the scorched remnants of a broken world. Amid the roaring chaos of a world swallowed by death, the ark floated silently, untouched by the fury that consumed the earth. Inside, Noah and his family huddled together in the quiet, their hearts heavy with sorrow, knowing that the world they once knew was gone forever. The once vibrant earth, now reduced to an ocean of destruction, was a vast graveyard. Mountains, cities, and forests all swallowed by the waters, leaving nothing but the endless expanse of a drowned world. The ark, a mere speck amidst the devastation, seemed to drift through a nightmare of silence. No more laughter, no more cries of joy, only the sound of the wind and the crashing waves. The death outside was profound, but the weight of survival within was even more crushing. Their salvation had come at a staggering cost. The world they loved was gone, and the silence of the ark echoed the pain of that loss. As the floodwaters slowly receded, the world Noah once knew lay in ruins, unrecognizable. What had once been lush, vibrant land was now a barren wasteland, covered in the remnants of destruction. The mountains that had stood proud were now mere silhouettes, half submerged in the aftermath. Noah and his family emerged from the ark not in triumph, but in solemn silence. The weight of the flood's devastation pressed upon their hearts, for they had witnessed the end of an entire world. The earth was silent, save for the faint sound of water dripping, as if even nature itself mourned. The creatures, once abundant, were now few, and the air felt heavy, as though the planet itself was grieving. The hope of a new beginning was overshadowed by the immense loss. Families, communities, and lives were wiped away. The earth was reborn, but at a tragic cost. A heavy heart settled upon the survivors. As Noah and his family stood on the newly formed land, their hearts were heavy with trauma. The faces of lost loved ones, the cries of the perished, and the memory of the world consumed by water haunted their thoughts. Survivors of the greatest destruction ever seen, they bore the weight of a broken past. But amid their sorrow, a fragile hope began to take root. God, in His mercy, had spared them, and now they were entrusted with the future of humanity. The rainbow that appeared in the sky was more than just a sign. It was a covenant, a divine promise that never again would the earth be destroyed by water. It was a symbol of God's faithfulness, a reminder that life, though broken, could begin anew. As the survivors looked to the heavens, they felt the weight of their mission and the grace of a new beginning. The rainbow was their beacon of hope. The memory of the old world lingered like a ghost, haunting the survivors as they gazed out at the vast, empty waters. Cities, forests, and families, all swallowed by the deep, lost forever beneath the relentless waves. The faces of loved ones who had perished in the flood seemed to rise in their minds, each one a painful reminder of what had been taken. The world they had known was now only a distant dream, a fleeting whisper beneath the surface of a new reality. No more laughter, no more songs of joy. The old world was now a silent memory, forever drowned in the abyss. As the survivors rebuilt their lives, the weight of that loss hung over them like a shroud. They would never forget the lives erased, the beauty destroyed, and the beauty of a time now irretrievably gone. The ocean, once filled with life, had become a tomb for their past. As we reflect on the devastating journey from the Edenic innocence to the world's ultimate destruction, one truth remains clear: the consequences of corruption and the power of redemption. Noah's story reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope can emerge, and from the ashes of the old world, a new beginning can rise. But the haunting memory of what was lost will stay with us forever. If you found this story captivating, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who need to hear this powerful tale. Also, turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your insights and theories. Thanks for watching.